All right, sexual harassment training. So sexual harassment really hasn't been in the news for a while. It's kind of been a pretty quiet topic. I'm sure you guys haven't heard anything about it. Nothing? So we're going to talk about discrimination and harassment. Some of the same stuff we talked about in the last hour and some new stuff. But the most important thing I really want you to take away from this, we're going to talk a lot about sexual harassment, and we hear about that in the news all the time, and we know it's a big deal, and we know we have to think about it. But the most important thing is really making sure that the city has a culture, a good culture, where people are treated with respect and dignity. And most of the time, if you apply that rule, you just treat people well and with respect and dignity, you're not going to get in trouble, and you're going to have a good workplace. And we need to make sure that people are serious about these topics. And as supervisors, it's really important for you to understand your rights and your responsibilities. You have extra responsibilities as supervisors to make sure that these sort of problems are not occurring, or if they are occurring, that they're being taken care of, that you're contacting HR, and that they're getting fixed. So many things can be fixed if they're caught early on, if they're addressed, if people are, basically if it's just addressed and it doesn't go on. Usually when we have problems, it's because people didn't call HR, they didn't get a problem fixed, and it went on until someone was really upset. So we're definitely going to talk about sexual harassment, but I do want you to know that this is more than sexual harassment training. We're going to talk about all kinds of illegal discrimination and all kinds of illegal harassment, not just sexual. And again, if you're professional, you're just not going to have that problem. And as supervisors, you really have to be role models. All the research they've done about sexual harassment training recently, since sort of the Me Too thing happened, has found that most sexual harassment training is completely ineffective. We've been doing this since the 1980s and 1990s and not that effective. Why do you think that is? Because humans are humans? Sexual harassment training does absolutely nothing if the company doesn't have a culture of actually caring about it. So think about the Harvey Weinstein company. Remember his company? He had a film company. Do you think it mattered at the Harvey Weinstein company if you made a complaint about sexual harassment? I'm sure they had a policy against sexual harassment. They probably had an HR department. Did it matter if you made a complaint? What if the top guy is the sexual harasser and nothing is ever done if anyone makes a complaint, except for maybe they get paid off and sent away? That's not changing the culture of the company, right? If you don't have a culture where the people at the top, the supervisors, take it seriously and make sure that it doesn't happen and are good role models for their employee, then it just doesn't matter. Training only matters if people actually care about it. So what is employment discrimination? It's exactly what we talked about in the last hour. It's those same categories of people, and it's anytime you treat them differently because they're in one of those protected classes. And these come from a variety of areas. Title VII is where most of those classes come from. This really started in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which created the concept of disability discrimination. We have the Age Discrimination in Employment Act and some other federal and state laws that create these categories. And again, here they are. The same categories we just talked about are involved not only in hiring discrimination, but any kind of employment discrimination and any kind of employment harassment. So we talk so much about sexual harassment and hear about it in the news, but you could have disability harassment. If people were making jokes all the time about someone because they're disabled, that would be disability harassment. Even if they weren't not promoted or not hired, they were put in the job, they were promoted, but if people are making fun of them, making it really hard for them to work, making it uncomfortable to be at work, that would be harassment. Same thing with religion or veteran status. Any of these categories could be the same thing. Because harassment is really just one type of discrimination. It's not the type where you refuse to hire someone or you refuse to promote them, but instead you make it sort of a hostile work environment for them. You make it unwelcome for them to come to work. And again, we're going to focus on sexual harassment quite a bit, but try to think about all these protected categories and how we wouldn't want to have that environment for, well, anyone, really. Now, sexual harassment, we're going to go through kind of the legal concepts, but then we're going to go through a lot of scenarios, because I think we can all hear the legal concepts, but it's not too helpful if we don't kind of talk about the specifics and what maybe it looks like in their real workplace. So sexual harassment is an unwelcome request for a sexual favor, advance, other sexual conduct, sexual jokes. It could be a real explicit expectation that somebody either accept a relationship, we call this quid pro quo, or we threaten someone's employment if they don't go along with our request to date them. Or it could just be creating a hostile, offensive work environment for someone. They don't want to go to work because it's just uncomfortable to be there because of what's going on in their environment. And this cartoon I like because it says, "Hey, girly boy, too bad you couldn't close that deal. I guess this is a man's job. Why don't you just wear a dress to work? You sure look cute in one, ha, ha, ha." So this guy is not interested, the guy he's making fun of, he's not interested in him sexually. He's not trying to get him to go out with him. He's not, is not that kind of interest, but it doesn't matter, does it? The contact just has to be unwelcome. And it can be verbal, it can be physical, and they don't have to be sexually motivated. Anytime you single someone out because of their gender and make fun of them or make jokes or make it uncomfortable for them, that can be sexual harassment, even if you're not motivated by a sexual desire. And it can happen to anyone by anyone. They can be of different genders, same gender. It's just anytime it's unwelcome. And just because someone in the end acquiesces and goes along with it doesn't mean necessarily that it's welcome. Sometimes people go along with it because they don't really feel like they have a choice, right? And we can think about the Harvey Weinstein company again. So in terms of quid pro quo, this is sort of the worst kind of sexual harassment, I guess, maybe, well, except for assault. But this is where someone really takes advantage of their position to get someone to go along with something they want to do or punish them if they don't. So sort of, if you come home with me, I might have something good to say to your supervisor. Or I have a lot of power here. Maybe you should date me, hang out with me. If you date me, I can get you a promotion. This is sort of the worst kind of stuff we think about. And again, even if it works, the person acquiesces in the end. Giving in isn't consent. If the person didn't really want to consent, well, what's the difference? How do you know? How do you know if someone's just giving in or if they're consenting? Should a supervisor ever be saying, if you go out with me, I can get you a promotion? Well, because then you won't know why they went out with you, right? Whenever you have that type of language or that kind of conduct, it's always questionable because why is the person acquiescing? If you're making threats or promises, it's problematic, especially if you're a supervisor. Do you guys have rules against supervisors having romantic relationships with people below them? What's the rule? Don't ask anyone below you who you supervise on a date. Does that mean anyone that they directly supervise or anyone in the whole company if they're a supervisor?
If they're a supervisor, there should be no one below them that they are.
Do they directly supervise or at all?
In the department.
In the department, okay. Everyone clear on that? All right. Okay, so hostile work environment is the more typical kind, so not the quid pro quo where you're making a threat or a promise, but where you're just creating some kind of hostile work environment. It makes it difficult for the person to perform their work. So an example might be Paul tapes a pornographic photo on Mary's locker once a week. So Mary doesn't want to go to work. She's going to find this on her locker. It's very uncomfortable. It's very, inappropriate. And it makes it difficult for her to work. The law also looks at whether it's frequent or pervasive conduct that makes other people uncomfortable. So in this situation, Mary's embarrassed every time she has to look at the photo. It makes her uncomfortable and makes it difficult for her to do her work. So sometimes, there might be one off-color joke that's probably not illegal sexual harassment. You still shouldn't do it, but it's usually not, one misstep of that sort is probably not a sexual harassment claim, something that you should not do and you should fix, since they may complain about it, but probably not legally sexually harassment. But we're going to talk beyond that. We're going to talk about what's appropriate and inappropriate, regardless of whether it technically is sexual harassment. It's also important to know that it can happen to third parties. So in my example, maybe Paul puts that picture on Mary's locker every week, and Mary doesn't care so much, but James sees it. He's not the intended recipient, but he walks by and he sees it and he doesn't like it. It makes him uncomfortable. Does that matter? If he wasn't the recipient? Yeah, James is also entitled to go to work and do his job without seeing inappropriate pictures around, right? And it doesn't matter if it was directed at him or not. If it makes him uncomfortable, he could also be a victim. It can also be created by third parties. So if the mailman comes in, doesn't work for Sandy City, but he comes in, or the UPS woman, and they come in and they tell Mary, "You look delicious," every time they make a delivery. Is that sexual harassment? Is that Sandy City's fault if it's the mail carrier? If it doesn't work for them? Yeah, it is. It is. So we have a responsibility as an employer to make sure that the workplace is free of sexual harassment, and it doesn't matter who's creating it. It could be a third party, it could be a customer, it could be, a vendor coming in, anyone. If you saw that sort of thing happening, you would want to address it. So in this situation, what should we do about the mailman? Yeah, someone's got to tell him to stop, and if he doesn't stop, we're going to get HR involved, and they're probably going to call that person's HR department. We're going to get this figured out and taken care of so that Mary doesn't have to deal with that at work, right? Okay, so there's one thing that's kind of a misnomer out there in the world. Some people think that they're entitled to not work in a hostile work environment, which means no one should ever be mean to them at work. In fact, I think it's hostile whenever you tell me I need to get my assignment done by 5 because it makes me very stressed out. She's sorry. Is that okay? Are we all good now? Is that a hostile work environment? What if your boss is a jerk? Well, I said it wasn't a hostile work environment, but why is it not a hostile work environment? Well, it kind of depends. If your boss is a jerk only to women, that could be a hostile work environment. If your boss is only a jerk to people with disabilities, that could be a hostile work environment. But if your boss is an equal opportunity jerk to everyone, then that's perfectly fine. Now, is it perfectly fine? Probably not perfectly fine, and something we want to deal with, but it's not illegal harassment, because remember, it's all about treating classes of people differently. So if they're a jerk to everyone, and we're not entitled, people think this sometimes, we're not entitled to go to a stress-free job where we never think anyone's a jerk or difficult or puts pressure on us, right? Does anyone here ever have a stressful day at work? Never? Good, excellent. No, it is stressful. Of course it's stressful. So it's important to understand the difference, especially when you're a supervisor. Now that doesn't mean if someone really thinks their boss is being a jerk, we might want to look into it and see if we can improve things. We don't want that, but it may not be illegal harassment. So because the courts really look, what's the severity of the conduct, the frequency, of course, whether it discriminates against a person or group of people, and whether the conduct is welcome or unwelcome. And really, the last point is really important, which is that we want to stop this before it grows, because most of these situations we don't need to make a federal case out of. They don't ever need to come to me to litigate, and I literally mean make a federal case, because most of these end up in federal court. If someone has a tendency to tell jokes that aren't quite appropriate, why don't we take that person aside and talk to them and let them know that those jokes aren't cool, and let's just get this stopped. Before it becomes a big problem. That, this person may just be completely unaware. Do we know people like that? They're completely unaware that they're not behaving quite appropriately. And even if we're the victim, if it's something that we think we can deal with, that it can be addressed, let's just get it fixed and not try to, make a big problem. There are times to make it a big problem, but not always. Okay, so let's talk about this situation. So Susie's a new employee. After she's hired, she gets a text message from her supervisor that says, "You're the hottest girl here. 3 dates equals 1 raise." The text messages make Susie uncomfortable. She didn't respond. She hopes the supervisor will take the hint. The next day, he hugs her, pats her rear end, and says, "The way you look in that dress, it's clear you're my best hire yet." She pushes him away and reports the incident to her manager. Did he sexually harass her? And do you remember what kind this is? Yeah, quid pro quo, right? He's basically saying 3 days and you get a raise. It's some sort of promise. Plus, you don't hit people on the rear, and you don't you don't tell them they look great in that dress and they're their best hire, right? No, what about you look great in that dress? What about I like your outfit today, Barbara? What do we think about that? Is that sexual harassment? Can we tell people they look nice? What do we think? Yeah, she said, do you tell everybody you look nice? Those are really good points. So it's one thing if I sometimes say you look nice, and sometimes I say you look nice, and sometimes you, but if I only tell Barbara every single day and nobody else, that's weird, right? What if I say, I get to pick on Barbara because, I know her. What if I could say, Barbara, you look nice, but what if I say, Barbara, you look nice?
That makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's a difference. It's all context, right? So, and we also have to read body language. If you tell someone they look nice and they're like, you gotta read that. And some of us are better at reading body language and social cues than other people. If you're not good at it, then don't ever tell anyone they look nice. But if you're good at it, then maybe you can try. What about hugging? Can we hug people? Never? Ever? No one ever? Well, it's probably safest to not hug people at work. But do you think it's always sexual harassment if you hugged someone at work? I've hugged people at work. It's all about context again, right? If you always hug the same person and no one else. What also, if I come into work every day, I'm not going to walk up and hug my secretary, right? That's just weird. Why am I? But if I see her at the Christmas party and I'm with my spouse and she's with her spouse, at a festive party, we might hug. Different kind of context, right? Than, the middle of the workday, just hugging people for no reason. Any other thoughts about hugging? Just wouldn't do it. Well, it's safer. Okay. In this situation, the shift supervisor has been leering at Tom during the afternoon and making sexually suggestive comments about the way he looks in his uniform. Tom ignores the advances, and that makes the supervisor angry. So the following week, the shift schedule changes, and Tom is now working the late night shifts when he normally had afternoons, making it impossible to care for his children. When he brings this up to his supervisor, the supervisor says, well, you should have given me what I wanted, then I would have given you what you wanted. Is it okay to change his shift? This is quid pro quo again, right? Promising someone or threatening them or making repercussions if they don't do what you want sexually or in a dating environment. Plus, the supervisor shouldn't be asking his Tom out. James calls Sue into the office and tells her he will put in a good word to his supervisor about her if she agrees to go to dinner with him. She already found him attractive and wouldn't have got out with him regardless of his offer. So is that sexual harassment? What do we think? No? You don't think? Dang it, James, you should have asked it right. Well, he should never have asked it this way because this is a problem, right? It just sets it up for failure because she wants to go out with him, but from the beginning, he asked it in such a weird way, right? He shouldn't be saying he'll put a good word in for her. That's just not how you handle that sort of situation. And we'll put in a good word to her supervisor. Yeah, and also if it violates the policy, then can't do it at all. And why do we have that policy? Why not date people that are below you in your own department? What's that? Because when it goes bad, you're going to retaliate. Yeah, that's one reason. You're not going to be able to help it. And what about the morale for the rest of the department? When someone's dating someone else, everyone else feels like they're being treated unfairly, and that they're not getting the benefits. They're going to assume there's some sort of quid pro quo, right? Okay, in this situation, Jack compliments Dan's hair at work. Dan does not like the compliment, but he doesn't say anything. Jack never says anything more than that and never touches Dan or his hair. Is this harassment? Yeah, he needs to say something, right? Dan's got to let Jack know that he doesn't like that comment. And one thing we've got to really learn in this new environment is to use our words like we tell our kids sometimes, right? Use your words, tell people when you don't find something comfortable. And if someone tells you that you're doing something that they don't find comfortable, you got to listen and respect that. It's a lot about communication and just being willing to communicate, even when something's kind of uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say that sort of thing to someone, but you got to do it sometimes. Now, what if Dan's supervisor, Angie, notices this behavior and thinks Dan does not like it? What could she do? Right. She could also talk to Dan about, have you talked to Jack? Have you mentioned this? Does this make you uncomfortable? Does she need to go to HR? When do you need to go to HR? If Dan says something to Angie?
I don't like it, he won't stop.
Yeah, definitely if he won't stop. So, I mean, this is a hard thing because we don't want to take absolutely every comment that's made all day in the workplace to HR, right? But it's also really important that we take some things to HR. If we have a situation that's going on in our department and it continues, it's not being resolved, someone's uncomfortable, and we don't go to HR, we could really make Sandy City liable. And it could, as a supervisor, it could be your fault for not getting it addressed. So, if it's something like this, no one's grabbed anybody, nobody has said a really off-color joke. If something really bad happened like that, I would just immediately go to our HR no matter what. Well, I would try to stop it and talk to the people, but still go to HR. But if it's just, someone's complimenting his hair, you don't think he likes it, you try to address it. You talk to Dan, you talk to Jack, you try to get it stopped, and you say, Dan, let me know if this doesn't stop, or if you feel uncomfortable. Now, if he comes back to Angie in a week and he's like, Jack just won't leave me alone, then it's time to go to HR and get some more help, right? You don't want to just, if something's continuing, you want to let it fester. You want to get it fixed. And it's really important that we think of HR as, sort of our partner who can help us and solve problems. And the great thing as a supervisor is if you're in a situation and you really don't know how to handle it, if it's really uncomfortable, if you're not sure, you can go to HR. You don't have to have all that burden on your shoulders. You can say, Barbara, help me with the situation. Let's figure this out. Maybe let's talk it through, figure out a solution. Maybe they'll get directly involved, but you don't have to completely handle it on your own. And in some situations, you should not. In this situation, when Juanita is hired, she asks Mickey out for coffee after work. Mickey goes out with her once, but he realizes that she's interested in more than just a friendship, and he's not. So he says no to all of her other requests to go out for coffee. Then a few months later, she sees him in the break room, and she compliments him on his new sports jacket, and she asks him if he has lost weight. Mickey thinks Juanita may be hitting on him again. Is this harassment?
I would say it depends on how frequently Juanita is still asking to get out some coffee.
Yeah.
It's like an everyday where you're stressing out, that you're coming to work, they're like, oh God, here comes Juanita.
Right. But at some point, she's got to take the clue, right?
You would think.
Yeah, he said no. He said no. Leave him alone, right? But on the other hand, what should Mickey do?
He's already said no. Call Barbara.
Yeah, maybe at this point he needs to get HR involved. Or maybe he could tell her more explicitly, I'm just really not interested in you, Juanita. I wish you wouldn't give me compliments like that. And see what happens. Or he could go directly to HR. He could tell his supervisor, right? What if you're the supervisor and Mickey tells you this is going on? What are you going to do? Take Juanita to HR?
Talk to Juanita.
Oh, talk and HR, okay. I thought you meant arrest Juanita and take her to HR. We can't do that, right? No. Okay, in this situation, a female employee, Jennifer, attends a performance review meeting with her supervisor, Rob. Rob drops hints that he finds her attractive and especially appreciates how her style of dress livens up the office scene. At first, Jennifer is taken by surprise. She's attracted to Rob, but she's not generally thought it would be a good idea to date people she works with. But they agree to have dinner together after work that Friday. Is this harassment? Is it appropriate? It's appropriate?
I think it's inappropriate.
Nice save.
What about, should a supervisor during a performance review meeting drop hints that he finds his employee attractive and ask her out on a date? There's things you should do and not do in performance reviews, and asking your employee out on a date is probably at the top of the list of things not to do during a performance review. Because everything about that's wrong. So, even if she's interested, even if she says yes, even if, they get married, it kind of is problematic how it's starting, right? It seems like if you're in that situation in a performance review and you get those kind of messages, you might think, well, my performance review is on the line if I don't say yes. And also, he's her boss. He's her supervisor, so they're not supposed to be going out, right? But Jennifer and Rob do go out several times during the next month or so. Jennifer's not quite sure, but after a while, she decides it's gone too far. She calls him at home. She breaks up with him. He's distraught. He comes to her office. He tells her he can't let her go, that if she does break it off, she'll be sorry. He constantly makes excuses to come to her workstation. And he tells her that he will never let her leave him. This is like emergency button HR, right? Beep, beep, HR. Yeah, this is a bad situation. And one of the reasons Rob shouldn't be dating someone he supervises, because now things aren't going well and it's a really bad situation. And he's not taking no for an answer. Just because she dated him at one point doesn't mean she's not entitled to break it off, right? And if she does break it off and says no, he has to leave her alone. And if she has to get HR involved, then she should get HR involved. So everything we're talking about in terms of a sexual hostile work environment is applicable to all the other classes. So a racially hostile work environment, it could be a religiously hostile work environment, any of those categories. Does anyone have any questions about that? So a bullying, a jerk boss, but not, or a coworker, but not based on a protected class. So, like I discussed earlier, it's probably not technically illegal because the law only protects those protected classes. If that person's being a bully or jerk to everyone, or maybe just being a bully or a jerk to someone, but not for just because they don't like them. But it's not something we would want to go on in the workplace. So you as a supervisor would still want to address that situation and get it fixed, and you could still get HR involved. So it's important to know that even if it doesn't technically fall in the category of harassment, illegal harassment, it doesn't mean it's something we want going on in the workplace. So Barbara, what would you do in a situation like that if it's just someone really treating someone badly or bullying them?
So for us, if it's not one of these categories, then it's not something that we would discipline for, but we can definitely help the supervisor with the employee in like talking things through or anything like that we can help with, but it wouldn't be in terms of opening an investigation.
Right. So you're not going to investigate it, but you're going to coach them and help them. Okay, let's talk a little bit about where discrimination or harassment can take place. So what is the workplace? Is it just in these walls or wherever your walls are? When you leave work, are you free to do whatever you want? What about after work events? What if a bunch of people go to a bar after work, you're a supervisor, you go with them, and there's some sort of sexually harassing kind of stuff going on at the bar? He says if you're using your position as a supervisor, definitely if you were, as a supervisor, were engaged in that behavior. What if it's just one coworker sort of sexually harassing another coworker, but after work, off work premises? Yeah, it does need to be addressed, because think about it. So if this person's sexually harassing someone after hours and then they go to work the next day, is that person going to feel comfortable at work? Even after work behavior could, spill into the workplace, right? Okay, What about texts and social media? What if I just use my phone? Because nobody does that anymore, right? What if I just, after hours, text some inappropriate things to someone I work with? Not only bad and it needs to be addressed, but you also just created evidence, right? So when I started in this business 23 years ago, and you probably remember this, we would do cases and it was he said, she said. And we'd try to figure out what he said and she said, and it was complicated. And then after a while, it was kind of like he emailed, she emailed, and then it was he texted, she texted. Now it's like, oh, I can't even read all these social media posts. There's too much. There's usually plenty of evidence, one way or the other. Sometimes someone says they were sexually harassed, and there's lots of evidence that they participated equally in the inappropriateness. And sometimes there's evidence that they did not. But there's usually a lot more these days than there used to be. But I guess the point really here is, that, just because you leave work, it's not work time. There's no there's concept that you can just do whatever you want, I would say, doesn't really exist. If someone was really being sexually harassed or racially harassed, off the premises after hours, that would spill into their work environment, and that would make them feel uncomfortable, and they, could do something about it. It could be a problem, and it could be liability for you and the city. So it's something we would want to address. In this situation, Diego, Nate, and Ethan work together. Ethan is gay because they know it makes Ethan uncomfortable. Diego and Nate regularly rate the attractiveness of male customers and discuss the sex lives of male celebrities during their lunch breaks. They do this because they think it's funny, not because they really want to harm Ethan. Is this behavior harassment? Yes? Yeah, it's harassment, right. And what should Ethan do? Tell them to stop, and if they don't stop, tell the supervisor, tell HR. If you're a supervisor and he makes this complaint to you, yeah, or if it's been going on for a while, I might just go to HR and be like, I don't know what's going on. These guys aren't stopping, right? Because this is harassment. In this situation, Joe has a private office and a computer assigned to him. You find out from your IT staff that he's been using his computer to visit explicit sexually oriented websites during lunch breaks and before and after hours, but on his work computer in his private office. Is that a problem? Does it matter if it's during lunch or before hours or after hours, if it's on his computer? Do we have a policy about that? Can you use your work computer ever to look up sexually explicit sites? No, so this would be a very big problem. What if he printed the pictures and posted them on his private wall? Okay, well, it just gets worse and worse, right? What if he visits sites that are anti-Muslim or anti-Catholic? None of that's appropriate, right? What's the policy about using computers, work computers?
It needs to be for work responsibilities.
It has to be for work? No online shopping?
Shouldn't be.
No online shopping. This is terrible. Okay. So in this situation, Monica does not work for the city, but she's a repair technician who comes in and fixes printers occasionally. When she comes in, she really likes Pat, and she starts hanging around him. She tells him she'll give him discounts on some of her work for his home office. He's not interested, but she won't take the hints. Now she's leaving love notes for him and waiting in the parking lot after work. Is it harassment? It doesn't matter that she doesn't work for the city, that she's not a coworker? Doesn't matter, right. So what should Pat do? What was that? Call Dateline. Oh. He should tell his supervisor, call HR. I know it's boring. It's always the same answer, right? Jack and Jill work together, and Jack asks a number of coworkers, including Jill, out for drinks. At the bar, Jack corners Jill and kisses her. She welcomes the kiss. Other coworkers see it, and Steve, who also likes Jill, is offended. Is this harassment?
It's not a supervisor.
No, they're just coworkers, no supervisors. I hope Jack had some good reasons to think that kiss was going to be welcome before he went in, right? Like the first overture shouldn't be a kiss in the corner. But apparently he read the signals right, she liked it. But what about Steve? Does he have a reason to be upset? He's sad. Is that sexual harassment? No, sad. Steve just gets to be sad. But Jack and Jill's relationship blossoms. They go out to the bar quite a bit. They make out, and then they start talking to their coworkers about how much they love kissing and sleeping together. This is disturbing Patrick, who just wants to drink after work. So I don't know if it's sexual harassment, but is it a good idea for Jack and Jill to be talking about their relationship in great detail with their coworkers at the bar? Probably not a good idea, right? And Patrick, you don't want Patrick to go to HR and tell on you, so don't do it. So two employees start flirting with each other. They seem to be having a good time. They have lunch together. They're in the copy room for long periods of time, making copies apparently. Others have noticed their blossoming relationship. They're now holding hands. Sometimes they kiss each other when they think others aren't watching. Is this harassment? Their relationship blossoming in the workplace. What do you think, Barbara? What if someone complained to you about this?
It makes other employees uncomfortable.
Yeah, if it makes other employees uncomfortable, it could be a problem, right? Who wants to go to work and watch people making out in the copy room? It's just something that shouldn't be going on at work, right? Something you would stop? Definitely. What if they're correct that no one is watching? If a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears, is it sexual harassment?
Good question.
Yeah, there's no one to report it, you're right. Until Jack gets upset when the relationship breaks up and then he goes to HR. A young temporary employee hopes to return in the future. Her supervisor has shown special interest in her. He's driven her home on numerous occasions. He wants to help her career along and has promised to call other hiring officials to get her a permanent job. He enjoys the work. She enjoys the work and has told him so. He's willing to write a glowing appraisal, but she'll have to do special projects for him after hours and away from the workplace. Any problems? Should a supervisor ever be having an employee do special projects outside the workplace after hours?
Is it related to work?
Yeah, he says I have special work projects for you, but they're after work. They're at my house. Well, I'm adding. Are any red flags if you know about this situation? Some red flags, right? What? Yeah, why is he driving? Well, yeah, and I mean, it doesn't mean you can never drive anyone home. I've driven people home, but I'm a little concerned about this situation, right? Oh, yes. So what's the latent FLSA problem? Does anyone know? Federal Labor Standards Act? So if she does work off the premises for her boss at home, after hours, it could be extra hours that aren't being accounted for, not being paid, not being counted for overtime, right? So that's also a big problem. Okay, in this situation, Brian and Joe sometimes make comments about the kind of girls they like. One day, Brian says to Joe, "I like him with little round butts," in front of Jill, a woman who works in the next cubicle. Brian laughs. Jill tells him she finds the comments disgusting, asks them to stop. They apologize, but the next day they do it again. She tells them to stop. They just ignore her. She feels helpless and upset. She finds it difficult to concentrate at work. Is this harassment? Yes. What should she do? Right, and if you're the supervisor, what should you do? I know this is serious enough, I might go right to the HR. Well, I tell them, but to stop if I see it and I'm present or it's happening right then. But I'd probably get HR involved in this because they've been told they're not stopping. They're pretty serious comments, right? What if Jill never told them to stop? It's still harassment, but maybe they need to at least get a chance to resolve their behavior, right? Carl passes a note to Juanita that reads, oh, that's the same. Remember, that was bad Juanita and the other one. That reads, you have a really great body. How about you and I get together? Come over tonight. After Juanita reads the note and looks up at Carl, he makes some sexual gestures with his eyebrows and lips. I'm not sure how you do that with your eyebrows, but is this harassment? What should she do? Tell him no. Would you tell your supervisor right away? Is this bad enough that you might tell your supervisor? And what if you as a supervisor get this complaint? Would you think HR would want to be involved immediately with this one? Barbara says call HR. Okay, Jake works with a lot of Hispanic coworkers and likes to make jokes about Hispanics. He actually likes his coworkers a lot, but he thinks it's fun to tell jokes about them. His jokes usually start with, so there was this Mexican. Some of the Hispanic coworkers find them funny, but some do not. No one has complained out loud, so the supervisor just lets it go. Is this harassment? Absolutely. Should the supervisor let it go if nobody complains about it? Is the supervisor going to get in trouble? Potentially? For not handling it? Yeah, because the supervisor's job is to handle this and make sure it doesn't happen. You don't have to touch someone to sexually harass them. Okay. Jane thinks that Philip, a coworker, is attractive. One day she tells Philip that he has a tight butt. Philip does not respond, and Jane does not make any additional comments. Is this harassment? If it's the only thing that ever happened. It's inappropriate. It might technically not be harassment, but it's not appropriate, right? What if Philip, in response, tells Jane that he's annoyed by Catholics and he wishes she would not wear a cross necklace? Appropriate? Also not appropriate. HR is going to investigate all of them. That never happens, right?
Right.
Several coworkers frequently whistle or make wolf calls at Jamal. Jamal appreciates the attention at first, but after a while he gets sick of it and he feels embarrassed and uncomfortable. He tells them to stop, but they continue. Does it matter that he welcomed the attention at first? Once he says stop, it's stop, right? People can change their mind. Janet's boss refers to her as a sweetheart at work. While he never makes an advance, Janet is the only person in the office that he seems to say that to. Janet finds this demeaning. Is it sexual harassment? Well, he shouldn't be doing it, and she should tell him, right? And we should stop it. What if Janet's boss calls all women in the office sweetheart? Still a problem, right? What if he calls everyone sweetheart? That's weird. The answer is apparently, that's weird, you shouldn't work there. There's some people who are just a little clueless and just need a little help sometimes, right? Just maybe their language is a little out of date. We just need to let them know. And if they don't stop, then maybe we have to go to HR. Okay, Bill comes into work every day and hugs people good morning. He does not discriminate between people, and there's no sexual motive behind it. But Jane is uncomfortable with the hugs, but appears to be the only one in the office who's uncomfortable. Is this harassment? He's not singling her out, but if she lets him know that she's not comfortable and he continues, it could be harassment, right? And I think we already decided we're not going to ever hug here. Yeah, somebody decided that. Can conduct be harassment to one person but not to another person? Yeah, because it's about whether a person finds it unwelcome, right? So maybe I'm okay with hugs, but Jane isn't. Vin works on a manufacturing line and has a disability. His leg is permanently injured and he walks with a limp. Sometimes Kim calls him Gimp or says, hurry up, slow boy, when they're going to lunch. Is this harassment? Yes, harassment. Okay, this is, I think, an interesting one. Max is a supervisor. He often invites the men on his shift to go golfing during the day. Because of these golf outings, they become good friends. During golf, they talk about their preferred shifts and assignments, and he tries to accommodate them. Max is also planning on promoting his best golf buddy to shift leader, which pays $2 more an hour. Any problems with this? Yeah, is it discrimination? Yeah, is it okay for him to only go golfing with the men?
Well, that's a tough one. I don't know. That's why we're here, right?
Dude, I just asked the questions.
Yeah, but it isn't appropriate because of that relationship that he's planning on giving that guy a $2 raise.
Right. Well, and also they're discussing the shifts. He's making accommodations for them for their preferred shifts, and the women aren't being included in these discussions, right? If they just want to golf off work, but as a supervisor, you have to think about that a little more. You have to be a little more cognizant of your behavior, right? If it's excluding people. One thing that's happened with the whole Me Too situation is some men have said, well, I'm just going to stay out of trouble. I'm just not going to talk to women. I'm not going to go to lunch with them. I'm not going to golf with them. I'm not going to drive in cars with them because I just don't want to ever get in trouble. I'm sure you've heard that. Yeah, it's discrimination. Why?
Based on gender.
Yeah. Well, if you wanted to say, I'm never going to go to lunch with anyone alone, I guess you can do that. But it has to be men and women, right? You can't just say, because what happens to women if they never get to go to lunch, never get to go golfing, never get to have private meetings with you? They're not going to get mentored. They're not going to get promoted. They're not going to get trained, right? So the reaction can never be, well, I'm just going to stay away from women, unless you do that with everybody. But that's really not very feasible. You just got to figure out a way to, have those meetings and those conversations and not engage in inappropriate behavior. And then you hopefully won't get in trouble. Any comments about that anyone dares make? Yes?
Invite the gals to go golfing.
Yeah.
But don't do the shift stuff.
Well, I guess if they're all there. Yeah. Invite them to go golfing. Okay, so as I hope it's obvious, harassment can arise from a lot of different situations. Everything from flirting all the way to, criminal touching. One thing you can think about is, with respect to any behavior, is would I want my significant other or my child subjected to the conduct? Would I be okay with that? If you're trying to think, is it okay? Or what if HR knew? Just think of Barbara on your shoulder when you're trying to think if a situation is appropriate. And learn to read body language, right? So the main things I hope we know is always use your words, confront. And I don't mean that it sounds a very offensive kind of way, but let someone know, if you can do so safely, that their behavior is not welcome, that you want it to stop. Document it if it continues. And then, talk to HR or your immediate supervisor or any other supervisor within your direct chain of command. Those are the 3 ways to report under the policy here in the city. And one of those people should be able to help you. And if one of them is involved in the situation, then go to somebody else. Someone can always help. And let them know. And I know there's a little bit of a gray line in trying to decide, is this something I can just handle myself? Or is this something I really need to get HR involved in? If you're not quite sure, if it's a little bit on the line, you always err on the side of going to HR, right? Just call HR, talk it through if you're not sure. It's better to err on that side and get the help than maybe get in trouble yourself for not handling a situation correctly. Because there's really no such thing as an innocent bystander. If you're a bystander, meaning you saw it, you heard about it, you need to make sure that it's taken care of. You need to either report it or deal with it directly if you can. It can be really difficult to confront a person, and sometimes people just simply can't confront a person, and they just really have to get their supervisor or HR to help them. But these are some techniques for dealing with a situation in a way that's, instead of just really getting in someone's face, you can say something like, do you want to run that by me again? Kind of just signaling to someone that wasn't, what you said was not quite right, or I'm not sure I heard you right. Let me think about that. Or why don't we take a break and think about what you just said. So one thing that's really important to know in the law, and I'm sure your city attorney would agree, and that is that Sandy City can't actually respond to harassment unless it knows about it. And it doesn't know about it unless somebody tells them. But as a legal point, from the legal point of view, if a supervisor knows about it, the city is deemed to know about it. If you know, legally the city knows. But the city doesn't actually know unless you go talk to HR or talk to someone who can help you. So if there ended up being a situation where someone brought a lawsuit, something really bad, and it turned out that they told their supervisor and their supervisor didn't handle it, the city could, potentially be liable, and yet the city really never had an opportunity to fix it if you didn't let them know. So that's why it's really important that employees have ways to report, and that you as a supervisor know that a situation has to be handled, and if it's not handled, you've got to go to HR. Or if it's even something that's serious or maybe on borderline of being serious, you've got to talk to HR so that because they have very formal procedures for handling things. They have a lot of history with doing this. They can make sure it's taken care of. Because if it's not taken care of, we have a potential problem. Not only are people not going to be happy at work, but there's a potential legal problem. So your duties as supervisors include if you witness the harassment, but what if the victim tells you? And the victim says, I want to tell you this, but I really need you to promise not to tell anyone, because I really just want to keep this confidential at this point. At this point, I'm really not ready to take this to HR. I just wanted kind of sounding board. I want to tell you about it, but let's just keep this confidential for a while. What do you do with that?
You need to tell them that you have responsibility to notify HR.
Yeah, you need to tell them that you cannot. There's certain things you cannot keep confidential, because like I said, once you know as a supervisor, it's the same as the city knowing. And you have a duty to do whatever is appropriate to do in that situation. And it might be telling HR. It might be just something you can handle. And you can never agree to say, well, we'll just not do anything about it right now. Sometimes, and this really happens, people say, I just want to keep this confidential. I think I can deal with the person for a while. Let me see if I can. Now, I think it's okay if it's not too serious of a situation. Maybe it's someone who's just been complimenting them and they tell you and they say, I want to try to handle it on my own. You say, great. I think it would be great if you let that person know that this is bothering you, and you get back to me if they don't stop. And then you check up with them in a couple days and say, did you have that conversation with the person? Has it stopped? You make sure that you're following through. Does that make sense? Okay, but you can never just promise you're going to keep it confidential. What if you just hear about it or hear a rumor? You're not even sure if it's true. You hear a rumor that there's some relationship going on and that maybe it's turned ugly and that maybe there's some sexual harassment going on, but who knows? Rumors are rumors, right? What's that? Yeah, let's find out. It's information, so let's find out. Who knows? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but we can go to HR, they can do an investigation, they can find out if there's anything to it. But you don't want to, because sometimes, in my practice with litigation, we find out these situations come forward and we find out that people knew for quite a while, at least there was a rumor about something, but nobody said anything because they weren't sure. It would have been a lot better if someone brought it forward and we could have handled it early, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about your incident where someone says, I think I might be getting harassed, but I want to keep it confidential. I'm sorry, I can't, if you let me know, I need to talk to HR. Oh, never mind. So what do you do then? The person says, they've told you something's going on, but
Yeah.
they won't tell you now.
Right. So I would, first of all, I'd go to HR and tell them what happened. Say, this person came to me, so something's going on, I'm not sure what. Then you're probably going to want to you and HR keep a close eye on that situation and see if you can find out. HR might want to go ahead and investigate and call that person and see if they can get them to tell. What would you do with that, Barbara?
I would just let them know that in order for you to be able to help them, you need to be able to know what's going on, and that your job is to make sure that they have a safe work environment, and try and encourage them to come and talk to you. And then if they're still not refusing to, then come to HR.
Right.
Or maybe the other part that I know we have is, you don't feel comfortable talking with me, you can go straight to HR.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point too, because maybe it's just, maybe it's hard to tell you as a man, or maybe it's hard to tell you because you're in the department.
Think I'm polluting, maybe.
Yeah, so maybe they want to talk to somebody else, but letting people know, give them a copy of the policy, let them know all the people that they can talk to, and really encourage them to do that. And then I would just follow up and watch it closely. So obviously, if you violate the policies, you're going to be subject to discipline. And as a supervisor, if you fail to address a situation, you can be subject to discipline, up to and including termination. So this is really important. And then also, we got to keep retaliation in mind. I think someone talked about this earlier, but you can't retaliate if someone reports discrimination, if they are involved in an investigation. If you think someone, so you definitely shouldn't engage in retaliation. In fact, it is a lot more likely that someone will succeed on a retaliation claim than they'll succeed on a sexual harassment claim. What we see in private practice all the time is that someone will bring a claim for sexual harassment and retaliation, and oftentimes they can't prove the sexual harassment, but it's a lot easier to show the retaliation. They can show that after they reported it, people started treating them differently, or they lost their job, or they didn't get a promotion. Much easier to prove. So we want to be really careful about retaliation. And if you think that anyone is retaliating, also that's something you would want to report to HR right away, because it's very serious, just as serious as any other kind of discrimination. Okay. Remember, you're a role model. Culture comes from the top down, and you're the top. So create the culture that we want to live in. You can always involve HR, and I think that's such an important message, because sometimes as a supervisor this seems so overwhelming, and how can I handle this situation, and these are really tricky situations, and I'm not quite sure what to say. You're not alone. You have an HR department, a really good HR department that can help you. So take advantage of that. Let them help you when you need that help. Okay, that's it. Any questions? All right. I think we're good. Thanks.